one. Just wait for that to settle and we'll get started. Okay, thank you very much for coming. My name is Leeshai Lemesh. That's Leeshai Lemesh, like Flemish without the F. I'm a MC with Shen Yun Performing Arts. I've been with the company since day one, and I was at the Kennedy Center yesterday, and we'll be there again tonight. This is Alice Liu, Liu, and she's a musician, a percussionist with Shen Yun, has been with the company for 16 years, also with the company performing here in Washington. At 10:45 a.m. yesterday, we were in the middle of setting up for our performance, our first of 12 shows at the Kennedy Center, when the fire alarm went off, and then a security person came over the loudspeakers backstage saying, "This is not a drill, evacuate immediately." We went out. Turned out the whole complex was being evacuated. I heard there were people from across 6 different companies. So we were hundreds of people outside for the better part of 3 hours, mostly outside in the cold. I saw around actors, dancers, musicians from multiple orchestras, directors, and we're all out there. We weren't told exactly what was going on, but slowly the word came down that the theater had received an email threat targeting Shen Yun Performing Arts, and that it was now being scanned, and the police were coming, and they were sweeping every building through the whole complex. And then about 3 hours later, we went back in and defrosted and scrambled to get the show ready, which we did and performed at 7:30 last night, successfully and on time. There were a lot of reports that came out. Maybe some of you were involved in those as well. But what was missing from many of them was the context of what we're dealing with here, the scope. This is not an isolated incident. This tour alone, we've received 18 death threats, shooting threats, bomb threats in theaters where Shen Yun was scheduled to perform. Typically, they're sent the morning of the show. They're often sent to theaters in different countries at the same time. They say that they put bombs throughout the theater, and if Shen Yun is allowed to perform, they will detonate and turn the theater to rubble, or that they will come in and kill everybody on site. This started actually last year around March. We got 4 of these. I was present in a couple of theaters that got them last year, and again this year. And that in itself is still a small part of the whole picture, because these bomb threats, death threats, shooting threats that we've been receiving, not only in theaters but also at our headquarters, sometimes on a daily basis, and I'll read some of them to you later, are part of an 18-year campaign that the Chinese Communist Party has launched against Shen Yun and more broadly against Falun Gong, trying to completely shut us down. And they've escalated that campaign in recent months. The campaign really started the very first day we started and has taken on many forms, and I'll give you a little bit of an outline of that in a moment. So I actually started with Shen Yun at the very beginning in late 2006. And after a few years of being with the company, I noticed a phenomena, which was wherever we would go around the world, and we were traveling, in the beginning we were just one group, we were traveling all over the world, the Chinese Communist Party's agents or operatives or fingerprints would follow us around. So in the beginning, the things that they would do is they would send other performing arts companies to compete against us. And I'll get into the why of this in just a moment. And they would schedule them across the street from us. And sometimes because of scheduling issues, we'd have to move our dates or move to a different theater, and they would move accordingly. The other thing that they were doing from the very beginning is they would have diplomats in quotation marks, ambassadors, consul generals from their embassies and consulates around the world visiting the theaters where we were scheduled to perform and calling them, writing or knocking on the doors, telling them to cancel the show, or this will be detrimental to China-US relations, China-Germany relations. They will not allow performing arts companies from China to perform there anymore. There will be economic repercussions, thinly veiled threats the entire time. We have copies of multiple of these letters. I have them here as well. Often the theaters would push back, especially in the United States. I remember in Little Rock, for example, the manager said, this is the US, you're not gonna tell us what we can and cannot perform. And in some cases, they actually ended up doing some advertising for us. I remember we were performing in Canberra in Australia, in the capital, and I came out of the performance with my MC partner walking back to our hotel, which wasn't too far, and we were stopped by a couple of people, and they said, you know, we really enjoy the show. We're parliament members. And they said the entire parliament got a letter from the embassy saying, do not see Shen Yun. So of course we all came. And we had enough for a quorum here. We could have passed some legislation while we were at your show. And this was very typical. So it was kind of ended up being free advertising for us. It then, when that didn't prove effective, even though they have continued to do that, and even to this day when I go to theaters, people will tell me, oh yeah, we got the typical annual call from the consulate this year. We get them every year. They seem to be going through the motions with this, but then they escalated to other forms. We had tire slashings of our buses, and this is an example from last year, but this actually started in 2010. If you look at this cut, it doesn't look like much. It's a circular cut. But if you actually open it up, you see it's several inches deep, and it's cut in such a way that the tire would not deflate immediately, but would explode at high speeds on a highway. This happened to us when our buses were traveling from Montreal to Ottawa. It happened to us 2 nights later on a trip from Memphis to Little Rock. I personally inspected our truck and found a similar cut in Little Rock the next day, and this happened again in Costa Mesa just earlier this tour. We've had tampering with our trucks, with our gas tanks. There was a police chase involving a pickup truck that tried tampering with our vehicles in Fort Worth. And this went on and on for a few years. And we now have 24-hour security around our vehicles. But still, every once in a while, these things will happen. This happened actually at a garage in Costa Mesa when it wasn't under our supervision. When that seemed to not work, the newest tactic that we saw, would be around 2014, 2015, was the 50-cent commenters. People who they're paid 50 cents, supposedly, mao in Chinese, to comment on forums, on social media, and post reviews. So on stage in Shen Yun, when we have the curtain call at the end of the show, I can see the entire audience. People are standing, they're applauding, they're having a good time. I'm talking to them afterwards in the lobby. I've had family and friends come to see the show. People I don't know have spoken to me afterwards. People love the show. Okay, it's not 100%, right? But there's a vast, vast majority of the audience love the show. And yet, if you go on reviews, you see online all these reviews, and many of them are copy-pasted. This is the work of the 50-cent army. They also will post on social media and respond to things. Later, we discovered that there was a vast network, we don't know how big at this point, of Chinese spies. And actually, just last year, the Department of Justice imprisoned 2 Chinese operatives, John Chen and Lin Feng, who were working for the PRC. They were caught by the FBI. Their operations involved trying to revoke Shen Yun's nonprofit status organization status. We're based in New York, right? And so they were trying to revoke that. And the way that they were caught is they bribed an undercover FBI agent. They tried bribing an FBI agent who was posing as IRS official. And they were trying to have this whistleblower claim to remove our nonprofit status. This is all in the DOJ website, you can see that. So they were arrested and, in my opinion, got a fairly small sentence, so I'm guessing that they're revealing some information about other people as well. And you're familiar, I'm sure, with the Homeland Security statement from a few days ago about all these transnational repression Chinese cases of all these agents. So we've seen that as well in our case. And some of the things that they're trying to do is start these lawsuits. It's a form of lawfare against us. And we've seen that at our headquarters in terms of trying to start lawsuits on environmental grounds that have been dismissed, and they've been dismissed with prejudice, which means that they cannot be filed again because they're so frivolous. So this has then continued on, and then the death threats started towards the end of last year's tour. Our tour, and I'll get into this a little bit in a moment, is from late December, around Christmas, until early May. And so around March of last year, we started getting these death threats. We previously had seen threats to individuals. Our performers, family members, most of our performers are Chinese. They might be from all over the world, but we do have people from mainland China with family in China still. And their family members have been harassed. They've been imprisoned in some cases. And this is a constant issue for our members, that they actually have to be worried about their family in China. My first MC partner was from Beijing, and the National Security Bureau would visit her family in Beijing every single weekend, telling them, we know what your daughter is doing, get her to stop it. We had an erhu player, this is a musician soloist. When she was performing with us, her husband was jailed for 3 years and tortured. So this is a reality for a lot of our performers. Basically all the Chinese performers, all the performers in China are blacklisted in China. I'm blacklisted in Hong Kong for sure, and in China as well, I would assume. So, but the threats to the theaters was a new tactic. And it was clearly an attempt to scare people, to not see the show, to try to get cancellations. Not a single show has been canceled. And I want to emphasize that there's never, ever been any actual bomb, weapon, trace of anything. We don't know how many people are sending these emails. Some of them are being sent with the same email address. It may be one person. They're using VPNs. Nobody can seem to find them at this point. But they're sending often identical messages to different places. So yesterday, for example, at the same time that the Kennedy Center got its email, so did the Miller High Life Theater in Milwaukee at exactly the same time. So it was 9:32 a.m. Milwaukee time. And the threat here, the call to the police, I understand, was 10:44 a.m. The email was likely sent right at the same time, maybe 50 minutes to see it. Also at our headquarters yesterday at the same time, we received an email as well. So this is a coordinated effort. Alongside that, what we've also learned through documents that have been leaked out of China from people associated with the Ministry of State Security is that there's a new campaign to target Shen Yun and Falun Gong more broadly in the United States. And they speak of several tactics. And the bottom line of what they're trying to achieve is create a conflict between Shen Yun and the Falun Gong community, American citizens, and the American government. And they're trying to do this through lawfare, through weaponizing social media, including 2 Chinese YouTubers who have been identified by name in these documents as assets for the Chinese Communist Party, one of whom is in the United States. And to eventually get that into mainstream media in order to demonize Falun Gong and Shen Yun with the same party lines that we've seen in China the entire time. So that's overall what's been happening. There are a lot more details. You know, we had 7 sold-out shows in Hong Kong that were canceled last minute. We were locked out of a theater in Moldova and one in Seoul. And these are all experiences that I had that I can talk about if you're interested later. But there is a lot to this story. So if you'll indulge me for a second, I think the question for a lot of people is going to be, why is the CCP doing this, right? We can prove a lot of this. When I started noticing this, I started documenting these on my website. And you can go to lishailemish.com or just Google who is afraid of Shen Yun. You'll find it and have an incidents tracker there. And I have links to a lot of the documents. You can ask me for other ones if they're not there. I have 137 cases as of this morning, just out at the Kennedy Center, in over 40 countries where we've seen these examples I'm talking about. There's media reports about them. There's firsthand accounts from theater managers. This is all very well documented. So why is the CCP doing this? So to get to that answer, I really need to take a step back and hope you'll indulge me for a second, because you got to go back to the story of Falun Gong in China and Shen Yun here in the United States. So Falun Gong came out at the end of the Qigong boom, which was in the 70s and 80s in China. That's a time in China after the Cultural Revolution, where you have 100 million people or so practicing Tai Chi type exercises in parks, you know, the brimming at dawn with these slow movement exercises all over China. And in 1992, Falun Gong is introduced to the public. It had actually been around for many, many generations before that. There's a whole tradition in China, this is part of how I got into all this, because I was really interested in this, of these kind of spiritual practices, meditation practices that are passed down from one master to one disciple for many generations. And Falun Gong was part of that tradition. But in 1992, at the end of the Qigong boom, it was brought out to the public by Master Li Hongzhi and said, okay, this is going to be a free practice, and also I'm going to explain some of the things that are happening in this Qigong boom, and you can see for yourself and come practice this. Practice is very simple. There's 5 exercises. They're the principles of truth, compassion, and forbearance, and it's free, and it grew very quickly in China to the point that by 1999, the Chinese government estimated there were 70 to 100 million people practicing Falun Gong in China alone. Now, at this point, and there's a lot more details to it, because at this point, the Chinese government had actually issued documents and positive media reports saying how beneficial Falun Gong was to society. People were getting healthy, they were being better husbands and wives and employees and working harder, and this was great. And this was a great opportunity for the Chinese government to say, what a wonderful thing, a very Chinese thing we can bring out to the world. This is in the aftermath of the Tiananmen massacre and everything. Here's something very positive in Chinese, let's share this with the world. And instead, the Communist Party leader at the time, Jiang Zemin, said, no, we have to crush Falun Gong. There are 66 million members of the Communist Party. There's more people practicing Falun Gong than the Communist Party. We cannot have this. And he said, and all of this is publicly available, if the Communist Party cannot crush Falun Gong, it will be the biggest embarrassment to the Communist Party and to Marxism. And he pitted Falun Gong against the Communist Party and said it would be crushed in 3 months. You in DC have seen our parades every year. It's been 25 years. It's not crushed. We have constant information coming out of China about what's happening there. We can get into that too. So in the United States and around the world at this time, Falun Gong practitioners really being caught flat-footed. And these are people like myself. We were interested in the practice because we wanted to go sit under a tree in a park and meditate and contemplate the purpose of life and maybe be healthier and find some tranquility. This is what it was about. I came to Falun Gong through baseball because I was interested in guided imagery and meditation for baseball. And I ended up going to Tai Chi and eventually Falun Gong. Everybody had their own path. None of us were interested in politics. None of us were rebel-rousers knowing how to do political campaigns and lobby in DC. But when the persecution started, people were being arrested at Tiananmen Square. It was all over the news. But nobody knew who Falun Gong was outside of China. And so the media repeated a lot of the propaganda coming out of Beijing, including the terms that they use, including claiming that this is a problematic group and that this is for the good of China and everywhere else. And then we have hundreds of thousands of people being rounded up, thrown to labor camps, and then disappearing, tortured and killed. Later we have organ harvesting, and very well documented at this point. And so outside of China, we're thinking, what can we do? And so, yeah, you saw parades here in DC. You maybe have seen torture exhibits that people did, flyers on the street. There started websites and media companies, all with the purpose of exposing the persecution and what's happening to often family members in China. And so about 3 or 4 years into that, they started putting on these performances. At this time, I was studying in college. I was at Pomona College. And I was actually researching the human rights atrocities in China and whether or not it constituted genocide. And I was writing about this kind of stuff academically. Both my parents are academics. That was the track I wanted to go. And there was a Chinese New Year gala that Falun Gong practitioners put together. First in New York in Madison Square Garden, and eventually came to LA where I was studying. And a friend of mine said, hey, will you MC this show? And at first I said, no. I said, what are you talking about? People are being killed in China. I don't want to song and dance. What are you talking about? No. But she kept calling, and it became easier to say, okay, fine. And so I did it, and I hosted that show. It was mostly Chinese audience members at the time, and it was the Dragon Boat Festival. And the next year, we were at Radio City Music Hall, and I emceed that show. This was not yet Shen Yun. But that summer, they said, okay, let's do this for real. Let's start a company. And so then you have all these people who are Falun Gong practitioners who are elite artists, right? Because people came from all walks of life to practice Falun Gong. You had Communist Party officials practicing Falun Gong. You had farmers and factory workers, and you had top classical Chinese dancers and musicians and choreographers and composers. And some of these people were overseas. They were from Australia and Canada and California. And they said, let's create our own company. And so they started Shen Yun at a place now called Dragon Springs, which is about 2 hours outside New York City, and said, our mission is going to be to revive traditional Chinese culture. This is the culture that was destroyed almost entirely by the Communist Party over 70 years of rule, and actually even before that if you go back, most notably during the Cultural Revolution. So okay, we're going to bring this culture back, and that's going to be our mission. We're not going to be shy about it. And if you see our tagline is China before communism. And as part of the performance, we're also going to show what happens to Falun Gong practitioners in China. And so every show we have 1 or 2 pieces, maybe a song, that talks about the persecution of Falun Gong in China. Okay, it's not the majority of the show, but it stands out, and actually is one of the things that audience members find most moving and inspiring. They tell us that, because it's about not just about the brutality and the horror of the persecution, but the courage of standing up to it and the resistance and the peaceful resistance to it. So getting back to why is the CCP doing this? These are going to be your 2 reasons. First, the mission is to revive a culture that they set out to destroy. And we can talk about why they would do that as well. And the second is we're exposing this human rights atrocity they've spent more than 2 decades trying to pretend does not exist, pressuring anybody who will dare speak out about it, including American journalists in China, to not cover it, and revoking sister city relationships for any city that issues a proclamation, these kinds of things. And here we are performing it at the Kennedy Center, at Lincoln Center, at Tokyo Opera House, and everywhere else around the world except for China. And we have congressmen and CEOs and media executives and Hollywood producers and designers, and all these people are saying how great it is, and the reviews are online, you can see them on camera, and this terrifies them. And so this is what we're seeing now as part of that campaign. Personally, we've all been impacted by this. I think I'll let Alice talk about that briefly, and then I'll come up with a couple of closing marks, and we'll go back to Q&A. You want to come up?
Hello, everyone. My name is Alice, and I'm a percussionist and timpanist with Shen Yun, and I've been performing with the company for 16 years now. And actually, I really feel a part of me, I'm still in disbelief at what happened yesterday at the Kennedy Center. While I was waiting outside in the cold, I was thinking, wow, like anyone would dare to send a bomb threat to a performing arts venue that's basically the national cultural center of the US. So yesterday, I remember I was actually looking for my performance outfit, and unfortunately, I was really close to stage door when the evacuation announcement was broadcasted. So I had to file out without being able to like grab my coat, grab my warm clothes. And at first, everyone, I think initially thought it was probably just one of those fake fire alarm drills. So we went out and walked really slowly, and then we passed by security guards, and they told us, security guards of the Kennedy Center, and they said, this is not a drill, this is not a drill, everyone file out quickly. So while we were waiting outside, afterwards, well, at first they actually evacuated us to this building next to the Kennedy Center called the Reach. So fortunately, at first we were able to keep warm. But then after around like 20 minutes, I think, they told us that everyone had to leave this building too and wait outside for the K9 unit to come in. And when I heard the K9 unit, I thought, oh, this must be pretty serious and must be related to some sort of bomb or like explosive threat. So in the end, our schedule got delayed, but we still tried our very best to squeeze as much rehearsal and preparation time as we could into our day, because we still wanted to start the show as planned. Because I think as performing artists, we really want to we have a simple wish of really just to bring the best for the audience and really for our company to truly showcase genuine traditional Chinese culture. That's really just our simple aim. So even though all of that happened yesterday, we were still thinking of the audience members. And in the end, we managed to squeeze in a tight rehearsal. We prepared, I tried to prepare really fast. And in the end, the show still went ahead as planned. So we were really glad to see that we were still able to perform for the audience members who came that night. I'd like to share that being able to perform in Shen Yun is actually I'm really grateful for the opportunity. And I think it's actually a really amazing opportunity to be able to learn about my own culture and to truly connect with my heritage, because this is the mission of Shen Yun, is to revive traditional Chinese culture. And that's actually something that's totally unthinkable in China. And I feel a lot of people around the world, if you've never lived in China or grew up in China, you'd question and I think you'd find it hard to imagine why you wouldn't be able to learn traditional Chinese culture if you live in China. One of the main reasons that Li Shai touched upon was that it's because communist ideology is completely the opposite of what traditional Chinese culture is like. Traditional Chinese culture is really rooted in spirituality, in a lot of traditional beliefs. And those are the things that the Communist Party has been trying to wipe out for decades since they took over. So this was actually one of the main reasons I wanted to join Shen Yun, is to be able to learn and connect to my own culture, which I definitely wouldn't be able to do in China or in any other Western country. I actually remember when I was in China, when I was really young. My family and I, we actually immigrated to England, to the UK, when I was really young. But I actually attended 1 year of elementary school when I was still in China. And I remember reading through the textbooks at 6 years old. Almost all the readings in the textbooks, at least more than half, it was about the communist leaders and praising the communist leaders, like praising Mao and like Stalin and Lenin. And then at 6 years old, that was what was left in my impression. Like, oh, this is what we do as Chinese people. We should praise communist leaders and praise communism. Then afterwards, of course, my family and I, we immigrated to England. And it was actually 1 year in my teens when I was attending high school in England, when in history class, I did a semester on totalitarian regimes, and we touched upon communism. That was when I realized, it was really, I think, a revelation for me. I realized, wait, Stalin and Lenin, they aren't these great guys that the Chinese government are saying that they are. So I feel like growing up in the West, I had the freedom to learn that traditional Chinese culture is so much more diverse and rich, and it's full of spiritual and traditional beliefs. And it's completely the opposite of communist ideology that the Communist Party in China is trying to put forward to everyone. But now it seems like someone wants to stop Shen Yun from showcasing this traditional culture to people around the world, that people around the world, especially in free Western countries, have the freedom to see. My immediate family, we actually are all Falun Gong practitioners, my parents and I, and we've been fortunate enough to avoid the persecution in China because, of course, we left China many years ago. But actually, my grandparents on both sides of my family, they've been subjected to regular harassment by people from the Ministry of State Security. They would go visit my grandparents. In Chinese, there's a term called 请喝茶, which means you're invited to drink tea, which sounds nice, but it actually has a very scary connotation behind it. They go and they would speak to both sides of my grandparents, and they would mix the conversations with sometimes with threats, sometimes with bribes. Sometimes they would say, oh, you know, if you tell your children, which is my parents, to come back to China, we guarantee them safety. We promise that they'll be free from persecution. Other times they would like threaten my grandparents and say, oh, you better tell your kids abroad to not engage in any anti-government activities. Yes, they were subjected to that for many years, but they actually passed away a few years ago. But when they were still living in China, that was something that happened to them and to my family members. So these recent threats that Shen Yun has received, these bomb threats, these mass shooting threats, including sexually very violent and graphic threats that targeted female performance members that we have received. I feel like these are the kind of things that shouldn't be what people living in a Western society go through. These things are usually what happens to people living, say, in a totalitarian regime who have no freedom and are completely controlled by the government. So this year, I've witnessed firsthand really like how the efforts to cancel Shen Yun has really escalated. But as I said at the beginning, as performers, we really just have this simple aim to, and a simple wish to really bring traditional Chinese culture to audience members around the world. And we put in a lot of effort every year back in our headquarters during rehearsals. We rehearse very hard, really just to bring more like positivity and more hope to audience members around the world by showcasing genuine Chinese culture. But I think these bomb threats, mass shooting threats, and like sexually very violent threats they're really trying to scare audience members away. They're trying to scare theaters away from working with us, cooperating with us, and they're trying to scare people in America, performing artists, they're trying to scare them away from working for our company. And I feel, and this company is actually completely made in America, as Li Shai just described. So I feel if this scare campaign actually really succeeds, I think whoever it is behind this, they will be successful at destroying a very successful US dance company. So I feel that standing on free soil, standing on US soil, we have, we need to speak up about this as members of the company. Yeah. So over the years, many people actually, because I've toured with the company for 16 years, I'm always actually very happy when I see people when we're on tour approaching us, asking us about Shen Yun, and they want to know, oh, what kind of performing arts are you? How many shows are you performing? You're performing here. Usually, I'm very glad to see people approach us, and I'm very happy to answer their questions. But this year, I did sense that, say, when we're traveling or when I'm at the hotel, when people were looking at us, or especially when, I remember a few times when I was in the elevator and all of our backpacks and suitcases, they have the Shen Yun logo on them. And a few times I remember in the elevator when someone was looking at it, I actually did feel a little bit anxious and maybe a little bit frightened too, because I don't know what the purpose of them looking at us or maybe coming up to approach us to ask us questions is. And I feel like in America, we shouldn't be living in that kind of fear that someone might be looking at us or approaching us because they want to threaten or harass us. Fortunately, that hasn't happened yet. All the people that have approached me, at least this year, they've been very glad to, either very glad to hear that we're a performing arts company based in New York and we perform traditional Chinese dance, or that I've actually had quite a lot of people come up to me and say that they've seen our shows and that we're amazing and that we should keep going. Yeah, so that's my experience.
When Alice says that it's a great American success story, just so you know, when we started, we were one company, about 80 performers, dancers, musicians, technical crew, MCs, singers. The next year we had 2 companies like that, that toured around the world at the same time, then 3. We now have 8 companies that tour around the world at the same time, performing. We've performed in front of over 10 million people at this point, 1.5 to 2 million a year, about 200 countries, 200 cities around the world, 5 continents. So it's a huge success story in terms of what the company has done. But we've done this in spite of financial recession when we first started, in spite of COVID, in spite of not having any government backing. Forget the Chinese government. We haven't had government backing to support, or corporate backing for that matter. And with the Chinese Communist Party snapping at our heels the entire time. And it seems like this year is very critical in terms of them really trying to take us down. I have some of the death threats. I don't know if you guys want me to read a couple to you. Just give you a few examples. This was on our Shen Yun website, Chinese New Year's Eve. So that's January 27th, just this year. Quote, "We used alcohol and glass bottles to make a large number of improvised incendiary bombs. On the first day of the Chinese New Year, many of us will secretly go to Dragon Springs, that's our headquarters, in New York, set fire to nearby vehicles, then kill the guards, break into Dragon Springs, and throw them at the wooden buildings. Molotov cocktails, kill everyone in sight. At the same time, our personnel will attack members of Congress who support Falun Gong." Here's another example, February 8th, 2025 on the Shen Yun website too. "I swear to God, we will kidnap and kill Falun Gong supporters in the US Congress in the near future, and then dump their bodies on the streets of Washington, D.C. at the Statue of Liberty or around the White House." February 11th, 2025, this was actually sent to the Falun Dafa Information Center, which has been documenting a lot of the persecution cases, including what's been happening in Shen Yun. "Politicians and congressmen from all countries who support Falun Gong will become targets of attack, and even shooting Trump and driving a vehicle loaded with explosives into the White House are not ruled out." February 27th, 2025 on the Shen Yun website, this was an email simultaneously sent to Shen Yun headquarters, to faith and schools, and several other organizations. This is in Chinese, I'll translate it. We have the translation here. Children of American Falun Gong members under the age of 10 will be kidnapped, taken to high-rise buildings in the United States, and pushed down from the top. This is particularly hard for me to read because I have two young daughters at home. Girls will be raped, or their vaginas will be cut open with a knife and gang raped, then push them down from the top. I swear to Matsu that this prophecy will definitely become a reality. Where we live in the Hudson Valley, people don't lock their doors. They leave their garage doors open at night. Everybody knows everybody. I had to install security cameras, 24/7 monitoring, and I know a lot of people who have to do this now in New York. This is a map which I think you have in your handouts of the transnational repression targeting Falun Gong and actually targeting Shen Yun specifically. This is all over the world. Here's an email that we got. This is when we're performing at Vancouver, Queen Elizabeth Theatre last year. There's a picture of homemade bombs. We randomly placed a lot of bombs in the theater. If you don't want us to detonate the bombs, please refuse Shen Yun Performing Arts to perform here immediately, and expel the relevant personnel to leave. If the show starts successfully, we will directly detonate these bombs. This was provided by the theater after they cleared it with police, March 23rd, 2024. Here's one from earlier this year. This is in Atlanta. This is the original email sent to the Atlanta Theater. The translation is, if you allow Shen Yun to perform, we will definitely sneak into the theater as audience. Once the performance starts, we'll pull out our guns and kill everyone. There's 27 rounds and a handgun. These same emails were sent to multiple theaters. I think we can open up the questions. I think I want to just, not in passing, but I think it's important to mention that the Kennedy Center did a great job yesterday. Metropolitan Police as well. U.S. Park Police, they were very professional. And we don't take these pranks, and they appear to be pranks, we don't take them lightly. The theater always inspects the entire facility. They bring in canines, they have all kinds of other devices that they use. You don't know exactly what they do, but we see the dogs. And we make sure that even though we think it's a prank, and even though we have copies of the exact same email to multiple theaters, we make sure that we do due diligence and make sure everybody's safe. Kennedy Center has informed us they've increased security for the shows, including last night, but throughout our stay here, so it's safe. And obviously, the people who are sending these cannot be in 3 different countries at the same time. But that's important, and we do want these investigated. We do think that the authorities, especially we're here in DC right now, really need to look at it, find out who's sending this. We're getting taunting emails from the people sending these threats. We got one on our website yesterday saying, haha, you guys can't do anything. Mocking various parts of our administration and our security apparatuses, saying you can't find us. And we just keep doing this. So it's really time for whoever can in the US government to find out who these people are and stop it. All right, that's a lot. We open up the questions and see what we have here. Yeah, go ahead.
Obviously, these messages are distressing, but just to verify, there has been no incidents of actual violence. And also, can you speak more about how you are ensuring that people who are coming to these shows are a member of this group who is targeting you?
Right. The only actual acts of violence that we've seen has been tampering with our vehicles' tires. There has been no incident of any security or safety threat in any of the theaters. We've been perfectly safe. These have all been pranks. Police has investigated. Every case has been reported to the police and to the FBI. And they've increased security. They say that we don't know exactly what the Kennedy Center is doing. You can definitely direct your question to them in terms of security, but they said they increased security and they checked before the show. Yeah.
So we've talked about, of course, signs and evidence of seen over the years of potential CCP efforts to sabotage the show and threaten the performers. Just wondering if there's any explicit actions by, say, the Chinese consulate or its affiliated organizations of the CCP that's been trying to, for example, threaten the group or tell even lawmakers
So what we have are dozens of cases of Chinese embassies and consulates writing letters and visiting. We have pictures of them knocking on doors in theaters. We have theater managers and directors telling us they received the phone calls. We have copies of the letters. We have them from Korea, from the United States, from Europe. We have a copy of a letter that the Chinese, the PRC representatives of the United Nations circulated in the United Nations about Shen Yun to try to make sure that to try to cancel Shen Yun shows around the world. So that's the level of evidence that we have in terms of what they've done. And we know about the operatives that have been arrested, John Chen in particular, and sentenced, and that's on the DOJ website. Yes? 100% determined to not miss a show and keep performing and keep bringing the message of the show. And I think it's important also to mention, Alice talked about reviving traditional culture. The performance's message is very uplifting for people of any background, religious background, ethnic background, cultural background. My job as an MC is to introduce the stories and the legends that we have, but really classical Chinese dance, which is the main art form, is a very universal language. And you can express through dance and through music things you can't express through speech. And when people describe the show, they say it's full of hope and that they found in it a lot of virtues that resonate with them. And we have regularly, you can see these reviews online, people of deep Christian faith in the South of the United States talking about how this, gave them inspiration spiritually. And I think the reason for that is because the performance is deeply rooted in these virtues. The stories are the surface. And you might see even some of these stories in movies and shows coming out of China. But what Shen Yun does that's different is it keeps the essence of the stories, the virtues behind them. When you have the story of a great general like UFA, his loyalty and his sacrifice. And we have stories about the Monkey King. It's actually a story about a spiritual journey. And these are the ideas that really resonate with people. And looking around backstage yesterday, the dancers were not deterred, nobody's afraid. People are working hard. They're very good at what they do. They are the world's top classical Chinese dancers. And musicians as well, and they're very determined. I think for a lot of the performers, and including for myself, but especially for the Chinese people, their dream is to bring the show to China someday, and we're still holding on to that dream. But no, nobody's afraid. But we do want to make sure people are safe, for sure. Yes. My name is Li Shai, L-E-E-S-H-A-I, Lemish, L-E-M-I-S-H. And this is Alice Liu, L-I-U. MC, yeah. That was it. Yes, of course.
With some of the groups that are tied to or in community with people of color pulling out of the community center since President Trump assumed the role of chairman, what is your commitment to staying in the community center for this tour?
I don't know too much about what's been happening. I know it's been in the news. We are hoping to stay in all the venues that we're performing in right now. Our commitment is to audience members, and we have people from all walks of life and all colors coming to the show wherever we go. Like I said, we performed in every state at this point. And it's really interesting to see the reaction from audience members and how the cultural is different wherever we go, but the reaction is very positive. So in Japan, for example, people tend to be more reserved. And then you go to other places in the United States, and it's much more boisterous. So our commitment is definitely to the audience members, and we hope to keep bringing the show to all the theaters where we currently are and beyond. Yes?
Can you talk about the progress of any investigations ongoing or in the past about these numerous threats, and also,
The progress of investigations?
yes,
Mhm.
about threats facing the group, and also about, the initiation, over the years, the U.S. government has been racing against transnational repression by the CCP. Just wondering what's your message to the U.S. government? What can be done to prevent further threats?
Yeah. I think, personally speaking, I think there's, over the last few years, with all that's happened with China, you'll go back to COVID and Hong Kong and all these threats to Taiwan and things like that, you're seeing more clarity about what the CCP is. I think when the persecution of Falun Gong first started, we were saying regularly, I remember press conferences back in the day, when we were saying, if the persecution of Falun Gong is not addressed now, this will be an issue for many years to come for many groups. A very obvious example of how that's come to play is organ harvesting, where in 2006 we learned that Falun Gong practitioners were being killed for their organs, for reverse on-demand organ harvesting. And there's a lot of information, there's tribunals on this, there's congressional stuff on this. We won't get into the evidence of that right now, but that's all there. And not enough was done to stop it. And then a few years later, and when the Uyghurs were rounded up, and all the men started disappearing into labor camps, and now it turns out that they're very likely on a very, very large scale, maybe as large, being killed for their organs as well. And it's the same with the transnational repression. In 2002, I was in DC speaking at a congressional hearing hosted by my congresswoman from California, Lynn Woolsey, Democrat. And it was about transnational repression. And it was about how people in the United States had their phones, they would have conversations that they had in private in a park played back to them on their answering machines at home. And this happened regularly across the country. We had break-ins into people's houses in New York, including spokespeople for the Falun Gong community. We had people who were beaten in Chinatown. We had people who were taken into a consulate and beaten up in there. I personally was involved because I had been in China. I was beaten up in Beijing. And so we had a congressional hearing about that, and there was a House Resolution 304 that I think later evolved into House Resolution 605, which was passed later on about this. So this has been 20-something years, and we're very thankful for every support that we get from the government across both aisles and very much at the local level as well, but I think there's more that can be done. Yeah. Is that it? Okay, I think one more. Yeah.
You have in the packet a piece about the New York Times, and I don't know if it's directed at the dance company so much as it is sort of the larger Falun Gong
Mm-hmm.
enterprise in the country. And I'd be very interested if you have any comments on the genesis of this seeming campaign by the New York Times. As it seems as though it's had something to do with instruction or incentives, shall we say, from the Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah, thank you. This is a graph we made of the number of death threats we received targeting Shen Yun and Falun Gong by month, starting from March of last year to February 25th. 6 in March, 0 in April, 7 in May, that's the end of our performance tour, 0 in June, 2 in July, 1 in August, 2 in September, 1 October, and then when tour started, 9 in December, 15 in January, 22 in February. What has changed during that time? The New York Times is running these articles attacking Shen Yun. There's definitely a correlation between these articles coming out and the death threats. In fact, we received a death threat on our website. Let's see if I can pull that up here real quick. Right after the New York Times article came out, and we had a press statement on the Shen Yun website clarifying our position on the claims and how they were not representative of the experience in Shen Yun and what our company does and believes in. And the message we received was, please immediately stop slandering, spreading rumors, and groundless accusations against the New York Times. Delete all negative articles, that is our press statement, about the New York Times, and publicly apologize to the New York Times. If these articles are not deleted within a month, the slanderous attacks are not stopped, and the New York Times receives an apology, then Shen Yun Performing Arts will have inexplicable accidents are likely to happen to Shen Yun, to Fei Tian Academy staff, that's the school where a lot of the dancers are trained, and students' families. The residences may catch fire for no apparent reason, or they may be attacked by New York gang members. We hope you will take responsibility for them and their families too. So from where we're sitting, it's all a part of one big effort to silence Shen Yun. Be it the YouTubers that they're supporting, be it the death threats that we're receiving, the constant pressure on the theaters, and the articles in the New York Times and that are being parroted in other media as well. Thank you. Yes?
With all the challenges that you have outlined that the group has faced over the years, it does seem odd that the New York Times would try to portray Shen Yun in such a negative light. Why do you think this is happening? And in essence, do you feel as though this may be putting more lives in danger?
I can speak for myself. As somebody who's followed this for a while, I went to school at Pomona College in California, And the editor-in-chief of the New York Times at the time, Bill Keller, was an alumni. And he showed up at Pomona College to give a speech around 2004. And at the time, I already noticed a pattern, which was, and I made a graph about this, which you can find online. The more people were killed from persecution of Falun Gong in China, the less there were media articles about it in the West. And this was across multiple outlets, but the New York Times was very, very obvious and prominent among them. And I handed this to him. And several months later, they actually had a really good article about torture of Falun Gong practitioners in detention in China. And to my knowledge, that article in 2005 was the last article like that from the New York Times. The New York Times has a history of burying human rights atrocities. There's a book called Buried by the Times about how the New York Times buried the Holocaust in the back pages. There's the movie Mr. Jones about the Ukrainian genocide. And there's 25 years of not covering the persecution of Falun Gong in China or the bomb threat at the Kennedy Center yesterday, for example. I think that's my perspective on that.
Have you seen these tactics maybe used by the CCP against other organizations?
Yes, absolutely.
So this is a pattern.
It's absolutely part of a pattern. It's a good question. These are all good questions, but that's a particularly good question. Yeah, I know that, for example, the Dalai Lama, when he was traveling a lot more before, often his speeches would get canceled, and there'd be pressure. And some of these are, I think, Copenhagen, I think, was one of them, but there were quite a few of those. Film festivals would be forced to retract movies. Book festivals, I think there was the Frankfurt, I think was a big one a few years ago. Of course, we've seen this in Hollywood. We've seen this in the NBA. It's very much part of a pattern. The CCP talks about the 5 poisons. Falun Gong is one of the 5 major topics that you cannot touch. And so we get the brunt of this. We definitely bear it. And we've seen this throughout, but other groups definitely. Anybody who says something that the CCP does not like, and they don't care if you're a US citizen or where you are, and they will come after you for sure. Yeah. And I think Homeland Security released a document a few days ago with dozens of cases of Chinese nationals and part of the United Front operatives and spies and all these different things. We've seen, of course, a lot in government offices, more of these cases coming out lately. So it's definitely a wide network, and of course this reaches into military and other operations as well. But on the human rights front, for sure. And I think you will find that there are a lot of people in the Chinese dissident community who've suffered this for many years, who are very much supporting what we're doing now and have spoken out against what is happening with the CCP's their attempt to weaponize social media and Western media, and of course the death threats as well. And a lot of them have come out lately speaking about this as well, because they've seen it too. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Can you say a bit more about the organ harvesting facet of the activities taking place against Falun Gong? And it seems all the more incredible that this is not a feature of any reporting that's being done on the group here.
Yeah, often when it's featured in a way that's rather dismissive, when in fact we have multiple reports, congressional hearings. There was a tribunal about this in London with experts. I will say that there was a journalist with the New York Times, Didi Talto, I think is her name, Didi Tatlow, who was looking into the whole issue of organ transplant in China, and she was a correspondent for the New York Times in China who wanted to write about the claims of organ harvesting from Falun Gong practitioners, and the New York Times killed the story. Her editors would not let her investigate it or write about it. So that's definitely a case. Personally speaking, I actually was working with a researcher named Ethan Gutman, who wrote a book called The Slaughter, which gets into a lot of this. And because, we tour for a few months, and then I was actually between tours, and I had met him before in Taiwan doing something else. And he said, hey, I want to write this book about the persecution of Falun Gong. He did not believe in organ harvesting. And we said, okay, let's go talk to some refugees and get their firsthand experiences. And we traveled, and we went to, first across North America, and we went to, especially in Bangkok, where in Bangkok you had people who just escaped persecution in China. And they fled through Southeast Asia and got to Bangkok, where they were waiting for the UN to maybe place them somewhere. And we talked to these people, and it was interesting because they wanted to tell us about why they practice Falun Gong and how bad the CCP is. And we said, okay, that's great. Did you get a blood test in jail? I said, blood test? What are you talking about? I was being beaten up every day. Yeah, I got a blood test. Okay, how about a urine sample? Yeah, urine sample. How about your corneas? Oh yeah, absolutely. What about the other prisoners? No, just Falun Gong. And so these people were being tortured and abused left and right, but they were very much interested in the health of their organs. And we found one person after another like that. And that became the foundation for the book that he wrote later called The Slaughter that I mentioned. And David Kilgore and David Mattis in Canada wrote a big report called Bloody Harvest about this and movies about it. A lot of it's been very well documented. We don't know how many people. I've heard 200,000, I've heard more, I've heard less. We don't know. There's no way to know right now. But I think if you go on the Falun Dafa Information Web Center, Falun Dafa Information Center, faluninfo.net, they have a lot of information there as well. And they could also give you more details that's a bit more up to date. Falun Info, that's FALUNINFO.net, Falun Dafa Information Center. They have a whole section on organ harvesting, and they have experts you can talk to.
And is it the case that in China they are offering tools
So, yeah. So if you get into the research about this, I gave you one aspect of it, which was us talking to refugees. But one of the things that people were doing is they were posing as organ transplant brokers. And actually, in my work with Ethan, I interviewed one of these people in Israel, who he was an organ transplant broker. He got 13 people from Israel to go to China and get a heart transplant. The reason we knew about him was because the Israeli government went after him for tax fraud, tax evasion. So I found him, he told me his story, and I spoke to one of his patients as well. They didn't know, but they were told, yeah, if you go to China, you can get organs, within a few days. What we learned that they do is they do reverse on-demand tissue type and blood sample matching. And they go to the prisoners and they find who's available, who matches, and then they say they're executed prisoners. What they don't tell you is these are prisoners of conscience, and they're killed on demand for the organs. Yeah. Yes, sir.
don't have the name off the top of my head, but I understand that the woman who was reporting on this issue for the Times, I think not just about Shen Yun, but about the larger enterprise, was married to a Chinese national.
I don't know anything about that. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for your time. We appreciate it. We're going to get ready for our show tonight. Thank you.